All right, good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to call the meeting to order at 6:05 p.m. Mr. Gaskins, if you would conduct roll call for us.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis, Ms. Gallagher,
Here.
Dr. Gant,
Here.
Dr. Anderson,
Here.
Dr. Yeager, Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Ms. Hull, and Dr. Maddox.
Here.
And Dr.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Davis.
Thank you.
You were actually the first name on my list. I apologize.
No worries.
All right, thank you. I do think Ms. Hull will be joining us later, but we do have a quorum. We'll move forward to item 2, and that is to amend and/or adopt the agenda.
I so move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion for Ms. Davis to adopt the agenda. Is that correct, Ms. Davis?
That is correct.
Okay, and a second from Dr. Maddox. Any questions or comments? Okay, all in favor of adopting the agenda before us, if you would raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, the same sign. Okay, and any abstaining? Okay, that motion carries. That takes us to, that takes us to strategic, number 3, which is the discussion of strategic priority 3, climate and culture, and specifically 3.2, which is related to developing actions and processes to ensure equity is interwoven and integrated into all aspects of district operations. And so I know that, that we've sort of moved rather quickly this week, and so I do want to gonna open the floor up, for specific questions and discussions. We do have the strategic priorities on our webpage that we can refer to, as well as that. I think there was an updated document sent to us maybe a couple of months ago with the priorities and targets and things of that nature. But I am gonna first, Mr. Gaskins, if you have some additional information to share, or if you can just sort of give us an overview, and then we'll open the floor for questions and discussion.
Certainly, thank you. I will acknowledge that Dr. Watley, she is the owner of this strategic priority, and I believe that we have scheduled in March for her to update the board on this priority specifically. But she did brief me and Ms. Boness, so we'll do our best to answer any questions that you have. One of the things that Dr. Watley wanted me to share with you all is last year we did send out a survey to staff, which was called an equity post check. And so Dr. Watley, we had 311 respondents, and it was a post check about what are some things that we need to address that would make our district more equitable. What are some of the priorities? So some of the policies and practices, the top 3 that came out were our gifted AP advanced content programming, our use of assessments, and our behavior policies. And then some of the items that she listed as a need to encourage climate and acceptance was mental health, social, economic status, learning disabilities, and religious affiliation. So out of that survey, and we can share the rest of the indicators in our board update, but those were the highest ones that came out of the survey of those respondents. The other thing that Dr. Watley wanted us to share is that she is still in the process of creating an equity task force. So one of the initiatives related to this priority is to have an equity task force that reviews our policies, reviews our practices, and to assess them against a lens of equity. So she is still in the process of doing that. One of the first things that Dr. Watley was able to do and complete is that she has created a diversity workshop for our LSGT. So all of our LSGTs that hire new principals, they first go through a diversity training. We have been very successful with implementing that training at Chase Elementary, Timothy and Fowler. She is currently working on training the LSGTs for Winterville as well as Clark Middle School. And then the final item that she also wanted us to mention is that in the revision of our student code of conduct, that was also revised using the equity practices that Dr. Watley is trained in. And so those are all of the updates that she provided. So we can open it to questions.
Can you say again what, I mean, like not everything you just said, but the, like just bulleted points. I know that there was the equity pulse survey.
Yes.
And you said the equity task force is still in the process of being developed, but you said something else, a diversity training.
So there's a diversity training. Oh, there's two things because I forgot one thing. There's a diversity training for all LSGTs when they are selecting a principal. We also developed Dr. Watley and her team developed Ms. Bonus helped me, it's the equitable hiring tool. The equitable hiring tool that we use when we train principals in that equity hiring tool. We also use that equity hiring tool for our district positions to make sure that we're being equitable and we recognize bias in our hiring. And then the last was around the revision of the student code of conduct.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the floor for questions and comments for Mr. Gaskins.
So my first question would be, from that list of activities and procedures and operational sort of things that you do with regards to equity and trainings and diversity, can you talk about what levels in the school systems that those activities sort of penetrate? Do upper administration, for example, get all of those training opportunities, or are they sort of segmented?
So we've actually have started the training at the top. So Dr. Watley has trained us in the equitable hiring tool. She has provided us, I would not say a training, but the overview of what she's done with the training of the LSGT. And then she has trained our principals and our assistant principals in those things as well. We're actually having another training around disciplinary hearings and actions as something we saw as a priority. So Dr. Watley mentioned in our cabinet meeting on Monday that we would train or retrain our assistant principals and our principals around the code of conduct as it relates to hearings, because we were seeing a spike in some things that we probably do not need to refer to for a hearing, and she'll be doing that next week. So I would say at our district office, our cabinet members, it has not been as pervasive with our executive staff, so those are like directors, but it has been with our principals and assistant principals.
Other questions, discussion points?
Would you be so kind as to just read that initiative? I didn't bring my computer.
Oh, okay, the initiative that we're talking about? Yep.
That particular one?
Yep, hold on one second. If someone has it up, I have it on, let me switch over.
I can read it. So
Thank you.
The objective is to develop actions and processes to ensure equity is interwoven, integrated into all aspects of district operations. There are two initiatives that support this objective. The first is establish a CCSD equity and inclusion framework and collaborate with all departments on equity strategies. And the second initiative is to implement an annual diversity workshop for principals, assistant principals, and executive leadership and staff.
Thank you. And so, just for clarity, does that workshop happen annually?
So it has not been, I'm sorry to cut you off, were you?
No, I was done.
That was, it's hard to see down there, and then I can't see your mouth, I'm sorry. So it has not been created yet. So one of Dr. Watley's first steps is as she creates this equity team and trains that equity team, they will be responsible for this training that everyone will receive. So we've been receiving, like, I guess, components of it based on priority, but we have not, I think, received the full vision of what Dr. Watley wants to provide for the district.
Thank you. Other questions about those priorities? May I ask with those, you mentioned under there, like with the framework, creating the framework and the diversity workshops. The framework, is that more of like a conceptual sort of plan of what things are going to look like what direction the district is going to go in regarding equity, or like when we said framework, what are we talking about?
That would be something that I would have to get back to and ask Dr. Watley.
Okay.
I just don't want to
good.
communicate something that's not correct.
Yeah. And I didn't want to start putting, in my head, I started putting some of these things that you mentioned as like, okay, well, that's the framework, but I just wanted to be sure when you mentioned, specifically framework, I wanted to be sure that I was understanding it.
Can I ask another question? Oh, sorry.
I don't know how to ask it. Does the district currently see a need to prioritize creating a position for a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer?
Great question. One of the steps moving forward that Dr. Watley has suggested is hiring an equity officer. We've talked a little bit about that internally around do those duties and responsibilities exist in a current position? Do those duties and responsibilities exist in a new position? And then the pros and cons of having it as a separate position, although we want it to be pervasive in everything that everyone does. So we're still having internal conversations about that, but one of her next steps, as I read her notes, is that she wants to hire an equity officer. If that is something that the cabinet would support, then we would write that job description and bring it forward to the board.
Other questions? Dr. Anderson, you had a...
So the annual diversity workshops have not started happening yet, but in the trainings that are currently ongoing with administrators, what within those trainings helps with broad understandings of how to protect children with regards to issues of equity, discrimination, et cetera?
I don't know if and I don't know all of them, we have annual trainings that HR requires us to do. I am not certain, I can't speak to if they specifically spell out discrimination and the other things that you listed. We are required to do annual child abuse training. I know that is not what you asked, but I know that is something that comes up every year. And then part of it is really the training that all leaders received in their grad programs. We are governed by the code of conduct, what is it called? The Educators Code of Conduct, and they have different standards. And one of those standards speaks to leaders not allowing harassment or being a part of harassment of discriminatory practices of students. So that is something that our certificates are held to. I think there is room for us to provide that training, but I think there is an expectation that leaders understand that.
So I walked in when we were talking about the diversity workshops. Do we have any trainings that specifically deal with, I want to get it right, culturally responsive training for administrators, staff, and everyone coming into contact with children that's a little bit different from just diversity training?
Yes, we do have that training. I am not sure if that training is offered district-wide. Our behavior specialists, we have some behavior specialists where that is their specialty, and so they provide that training to schools. Sometimes we identify through either, sometimes it's parent complaints, sometimes it's staff complaints, sometimes the leader says, I need some support around this subject, and then we deploy staff to either train that admin team, train that grade level team, or train that whole staff. So our behavior specialists, in partnership with Dr. Watley's department.
And I did have a follow-up. I know that with our strategic plan, a lot of our policies, there was a big push to make sure that equity was woven throughout everything. I've circulated a policy, and I would just want, from your perspective as the acting superintendent, would you find value in a separate equity policy in addition to it being woven throughout our other policies?
I would be open to that. I grapple with what's the difference between the practices and the belief, because the policy is around the practices, right?
Right.
And so I would just I would be interested in what that policy would include. You have a draft?
Of
So,
course.
yeah, I would just be interested in that, because I think that sometimes if policies are beliefs, and we've done a lot of revision to our policies because they were beliefs and not actually actions, it would be more appropriate, in my opinion, that if it had some action to it.
And I think that was initially my thought behind it. So I would love to get some feedback from my colleagues, probably at a later date when we discuss it. But it's kind of this idea of taking the beliefs and actually putting them into practice, and practices that can be measured and people can be held accountable. Here are the specific things that we're going to do to make sure that we address equity in this way. And so those are my thoughts, and I know that this would probably be one of the first policies that we discuss since we've revised our policy or our committee structure. So I just wanted to put it out there, give it to the colleagues, give it to you to maybe take it back to staff. It's something that was introduced before. It was introduced before we changed our committee structure. But there were some other more pressing things that got our attention. And so now I wanted to circle back around to see if this is something that would be useful to our district.
And I would just say, from skimming it, Ms. Hull, some of the things are happening and some of them are not, but I like with a policy, it outlives all of us, right? So if I'm just skimming the curriculum content, we try to do a lot of those things, but I want those things to outlive me when I'm, when I'm gone eventually. So I think that a policy around these certain things, and maybe there are more things that are not listed here, just gives that expectation of how we do our work in these areas. So I would fully support this after talking to staff and getting some feedback.
Thank you.
And just to comment on the policy that Nicole is talking about, so you had said that you had called it like IAB, is that, okay. And I looked at policy IA, which we already have, which is instructional program philosophy, and I think that they're similar. It seems like the one that you developed has more meat on it, basically. And I wonder, but the feeling seems to be the same between the two. And I wondered if instead of doing an entirely new policy, if some of these things that you have in here could be folded into the existing policy.
I definitely think so. I think what stands out about the policy in my mind as drafted is that it gives directive to the superintendent. And so there's that accountability piece. So the superintendent shall do X, Y, and Z. So if it's not done, then we as a board have some measure to be able to ask questions in terms of it. Why is it not being done as followed versus it just being a regulation that we don't control and we know that we can't touch? But I definitely think there's room to look at what we already have and redraft or add or do what's best for our district.
I can say I was very pleased to see this excellent work that you did, Attorney Hall. I think it really succinctly gives us some guidance in terms of actually articulating our expectations. And so from a sense of being actionable, that alone is just worth volumes to me. And to not have it, I think the integration of it to other policies is perfectly fine, but I have no problem at all with this being one of those A-list policies that kind of set the direction and tone for what the district is and what the district isn't and what we're about. So I really heartily support this and look forward to our further discussion on this possibility.
Thank you.
And so it sounds like perhaps as we talk tomorrow, it might be an area of new business, for instance, to keep the conversation going. My thoughts initially, I think this is a strong start. I do agree with Kara looking at the things that we already have. Another thing too, I did want to just sort of publicly highlight, my support, and I would assume the board's support of, I shouldn't assume that, so let me take that back, but of a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer or director, because I do believe that policy, policy can still be rather aspirational, and so there are still some subjective language in where we want to be, but I think there may be different parts, like if the district is going to intentionally, pursue equity from a strategic place. I think some strategic either goals around equity, and I know that's a much larger future conversation, but there are school districts that have a an equity strategic plan specific to that, and I think that's where we get to those outcome measures. So whether we have this policy or if it's folded in, we, can then, begin to say, okay, what does that mean then? Like, how do we then hold the district accountable for, let's just say, initiatives, right? If we're looking at trainings, how do we hold, how many trainings are we gonna expect to happen? And if we're looking at performance measures. And so it certainly seems like there are a lot of different, components to this, should the district be, open to intentionally, just sort of going in that direction. What I wouldn't want to happen is that we have policy and then there are no outcomes, right? Because we have a lot of good policies, but, thinking through outcomes and just being intentional about it, so.
If I could just add, I do like Dr. Dykeman's suggestion. We were talking about at Cabinet that we have a lot of policies, and I think our practice is we will get a great new policy, but forget to revise or rescind another policy that is no longer needed because we've gotten our stuff together, and now we have something that can guide our work. Ms. Hull, if you could email this to me, I will share this with Dr. Harris, because he would want to be prepared to talk about, the process and then take a look at it.
Absolutely. It's already in your and his and Dr. Wiley's inbox.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I'm wondering if tomorrow is enough time for anyone to digest this and actually do the work. I don't think it's something that should be rushed. It's such a critical piece of change. It signals a change, and so I would rather we schedule it based on the availability of the staff and administration to evaluate it. So I don't want to have a conversation about it tomorrow when we don't know any more than we know today.
Yes, ma'am, and I was thinking more so a preliminary of new business, right? And when we discuss new business, it's more so what we will be placing.
It becomes a priority for us to do.
That's right. Like
I'm happy with that.
We can determine when we'll put it on, and hopefully Mr. Gaskins can share with us what would be an appropriate time frame.
That'd be great.
Right, so Dr. Harris has created a new policy timeline. I don't know if he has shared that with you all. He has shared that. And so we will follow that, and I think that hopefully by March we'll be able to bring it to the board for whatever that process would be.
Okay.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, too, I don't have the dates, and I don't even know if we ended up replacing the date, but we do have a strategic priority update coming in March.
We have a call meeting, it's March 30th, before that?
Is it
24.
24? Mm-hmm, okay.
That'll be a good time.
So just saying there, we even between board meetings and that, I think, if the district determines that that's an okay time, we have some opportunities coming up.
Okay, so I want to go back to Dr. Watley's suggestion for a position for equity. I can't remember what you named it, or what she named it. So what does the cabinet decision-making process look like? Like, what's the turnaround time for a discussion? Because I can't imagine this being a new discussion.
It's not a new discussion. Actually, we are in budget season now. So Dr. Blankenship has already presented to us if we are going to add a new position. This is the process that we need to take to add that new position. It has budget implications, of course, which we would have to present to you all. And then also the process of writing a job description. So we have talked about it, I guess, for a while. So now it's time for us to act on it. And so I think our thinking has been, is it a position within itself? Or is it Dr. Watley's job to be that officer for the district? But we've also been trying to be aware of adding new positions to the district. So if we do, and I think we're in support of this position, but if we do add an additional position to the district, are there other positions that we need to phase out? Mm-hmm. So, yes, ma'am. So we don't have, so we're not so as top heavy. Mm-hmm. So we're in that conversation right now. And so we would be presenting this, if we decided that this is what we wanted to do and the budget lend itself to it, we would approve that along with the budget timeline, and this would be a position that would start in July.
Okay. So you answered my follow-up question. Would that mean that other positions are going to be considered to be phased out? So thank you. And then for, let's say, for any department, and this is just so that I know, or department, any chief
Division or
at
department,
the table.
yes.
For innovation and ideas, when presented, what happens? Like, do y'all make the decision at the table on whether or not to move forward with the innovation or an initiative? Or how does that work?
I guess it just kind of depends. Sometimes the innovation comes out of the school, mm-hmm. and myself and a lot of times Dr. Watley, we will present that idea, or we will ask that person to come in to present that idea. And if it's feasible and there's no barriers to it, it's usually approved. Sometimes it's hard to act on things in the middle of the year because we approve the budget mm-hmm. At the end of the year. But usually we will just talk about the pros and cons depending on what the innovative idea is. And if financially we can do it, or there is a person that can implement it, we usually do those things.
And then who approves or denies?
It's usually the superintendent has the final thought. Of course, Dr. Thomas is very much please bring me the recommendation. What is the consensus of the group? Mm-hmm. And usually if it's the consensus of the group, we try to make it happen.
Okay.
I have a quick question, and maybe it's a memory jogger for me. Who is our ombudsman? Do we have an ombudsman? I think we had one. Who's in that position now? Ombudsman? We don't have one? No. I think we had one at one time, but okay. I was curious about that. I think we have one, yeah, because that's underutilized. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Could I transition really quickly to, I know that we've been talking a lot about this piece of the strategic plan, but a part of that strategic plan is interweaving equity into operations. So I kind of wanted to transition into that rather than the bigger picture policy. Could you walk us through what the process is when issues of any sort of discrimination or feelings or actions that could appear discriminatory happen within the schools? Kind of walk us through that process.
Yes. So usually, if there is an allegation of a discriminatory practice or any allegation really, it, it may come to me through an email, it may come through a phone call, it may go right to Dr. Thomas. We refer all of those to our HR department. So we have an EEOC coordinator. Her name is Meredith Paget. She's our investigator. She immediately conducts the investigation. She talks to the individuals on both sides, and then she has a written statement usually. And so sometimes she can consult with our attorney around something that she's found, and usually she does not update us at all until she is totally finished with her investigation. Once she is finished with her investigation, she'll tell us if any federal, state, local laws or policies have been violated. In those cases where they have been violated, she will tell us the district has to report this to the PSC. If the teacher has a license, we may have to report things to the authority, depending on what they are. And then she also will tell us what the corrective action should be. So this person should be suspended. We're going to have to terminate this person. I'm going to have to report this person to the PSC, and if their license is suspended, then we might have to put them on leave or terminate them, depending on how long it is. If the investigation returns that the allegations are not valid or that it doesn't require a severe corrective action, she will contact that person's immediate supervisor to talk through what she's learned, and then that supervisor may have an opportunity for either coaching that individual or providing that person with some type of performance management plan to be a little more, I think, firm around the correction that's needed. And usually with all of those, just to add, she goes right from her investigation to our chief of HR and our superintendent.
Does she have an outline of what her investigation process looks like? And also, is she required to engage in any type of cultural sensitivity, diversity, sustainability training? And how often is that?
I'm sure she does. I can't speak to the training. I know she is trained yearly around her EOC role. And I know that she follows a process. I'm just not sure what that process is.
That is something, if my colleagues would like to see it, I would like to see what that process is in terms of concrete steps that are followed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Along those lines, if there is and these were the questions that I had sent earlier, so if there is a teacher that feels that an administrator is acting in a way that is discriminatory, and or if a parent felt that way, is there a different process for them to lodge that, and is there a formal process for them to do that, or is it more of an email?
So the email or the phone call kind of puts us on notice to make it a formal process. That's what alerts us that we need to do an investigation. If it is the principal of the school, the teacher can contact the HR directly, or they can send an email to the superintendent who will put them in touch with HR. If it is the assistant principal, they could contact their principal, who could do it for them, or they can go right to HR. The same thing with the student. If a parent thinks that the teacher is discriminating against, their student, we would encourage them to contact their principal. But if they don't feel comfortable for whatever reason, they can contact our HR office, our superintendent's office, and it would be the same process. Meredith Paget, she also does our Title IX investigations. So eventually they get to her, and then she's the person that investigates the process.
And do you,
Discrimination against a student, those are in your policy JAA, and there are 3 exhibits and 1 regulation that walk you through every step.
okay.
For employees, it's policy GAE and GAE.
Mr. Pruitt, can you hold the mic, or Emily, could you hold it closer?
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Emily. Yes, for student discrimination, it's JAA, 3 exhibits and 1 reg. For employees, it's, if I remember correctly, GAE and GAE paren 1, and there's some regs and exhibits for those as well.
So just in thinking about, as a board, the ways in which we can ensure equity and that there isn't discrimination, and we obviously are not involved in the operational details, or, you know, what happens when something is brought to HR. So just knowing that there is a process and knowing what the process is helpful, but also trying to think of ways in which we can make sure that people understand the process and know what to do if they felt like there was something that they wanted to report. I don't know how we can do that, but that is something that I thought about. And then also, it sounds like if something doesn't reach the level of being a legal issue, then so if something does reach the level of being a legal issue, then that takes it sort of to a different step. If it doesn't, then it seems a little bit more nebulous what happens, right?
Well, some things are against our policy, and that might not have a legal implication, but it does have a policy implication. And then we do provide corrective action if a staff member, an administrator is violating a policy that we have established.
And so I guess another question would be, if things, so then is there a record of all of the allegations or things that are brought up against a person, even if they don't result in action?
Yes, there's always a record, and if that, in addition to that, if there's corrective action, if there is a letter that is placed in their personnel record, it becomes a part of their personnel record.
So I got a clarifying question. So in policy, I can't see the policies. I don't know where to find them on Assembly. But so in policy JAA, that talks about discrimination in regards to students. So if a parent or parents make a report, then it goes, if there's a chain, and then something is done when? Eventually?
Immediately. The investigation happens immediately.
The investigation happens?
Yes.
There are deadlines under federal regulations that I've been supposed to do right now, and we've never missed them. For each step of the process, So, for example, it starts with, if I can do this from memory, the investigator first reaches out to the complainant, discusses, and this is, most of the detail comes from the Title IX sexual harassment context, but the same process is generally used for all types of discrimination. So the first step is to reach out to the person alleged to, student or person alleged to have been discriminated against or harassed, discuss procedural options, potential remedies, offer supports even without an investigation and a finding that it occurred. If that does not satisfy the complainant and they want to go forward, then there's a form complaint that's filled out, investigator with the person's help. Then the investigator gets witness statements, relevant documents, eventually makes findings of fact and recommendation as to remedies and supports. If there's, if the accused is another student, then student discipline may be part of the remedy. If the accused is as an employee, then employee discipline may be part of the remedy.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to get this question out. It might not come out correct. So what does the process look like for families who don't know to read the policy and don't know that making a formal complaint is the process, or don't feel like their voice is going to be heard anyway?
I mean,
I
I
can
think
jump
that's
back in. The policy that any employee or administrator to whom a complaint is made is charged to pass that along to Ms. Paget so that then she can go through the steps.
But practice, what does that look like for, saying, marginalized communities?
So a lot of times, and I'm not saying this is the perfect remedy, I think there's some work around this. We may get the complaint from their proxy. So the teacher may say, this is something that my student is experiencing. And so we always ask that they share that name with us, they share the student's name, they share the parent's name, so we can call them and validate what their claims are. Usually, if they're not someone that's gonna read the policy or know that they can email the superintendent or the HR person, someone will help them, you know, and then all we ask is that we have the information that we can contact them so we can interview them and investigate it first person. Sometimes we have things that are, I'm representing someone that wants to be anonymous, and although we try to look into those things, it's really hard to investigate those things without talking to someone first person.
So my experience is that's when I get a call from somebody. And then I take it to the right people, starting with the principal.
And so one of the things I was just trying to pull, you know, the pieces together as far as like how are we sure that marginalized or underserved populations or people that typically don't have a voice actually know the process, or that we're passing that information along, I guess I should say. And that just sort of brings me back to the earlier point, just sort of advocacy for some type of strategic direction at some point whenever we do either review the strategic plan or even perhaps even revise it, because I think it's under that really, I think that's where the work is. I don't want to come too far over into your lane, but as far as us being able to say, okay, well, you know, how often has this information, has policy JAA and GAE been shared? You know, if it's shared in every staff meeting, right? If it's shared in, you know, during new teacher orientation, if it's shared at the beginning of, and I'm not suggesting that those are the things, but I'm just sort of wanting to just sort of be sure that that's on our radar, particularly as we evaluate priorities, that I do think that there has to be some strategic direction at some point if we want to see like operational definitions of what equity looks like, you know, in the district.
And so I think that is a good idea. We at the beginning of every year, we have to review certain policies as a part of our yearly training. Some of them are videos that we have to watch, and then some of them are the specific policies that we have to read over and acknowledge that we've read over them. Now, I would say that all of our policies are important. Let me just say that first, but some of the more important policies may need more than just a review of the policy. It might need a video and a review of the policy, and this may be one of those that we could do that for. So our HR department appropriately has us go through these modules and go through these trainings. It's quite extensive. It takes a lot of time in July, I'm sure you know, and that is something that we could add. I think that would be a good strategy.
Just following up on that, just not as a directive, but maybe as an idea. Now that we've heard we're going to have like PSAs or a news team or something, I will be interested in learning about how this information is getting out to the students as well. So not just the staff, but also the students, whether it's in a agenda or a part of the student code of conduct, or if it's in a PSA announcement, how can we get this information out to our students so that we can also teach them self-advocacy?
And if Ms. Boness, if we can make a note, I think that, and we have our student advisory group, so they may have an innovative idea that could help us and support us in that as well.
So I got a question that's kind of aligned. Where are we on the communications plan?
So we met with Dr. Harris today around our communication plan. You said communications plan? We met with Dr. Harris today around that. I can ask him to give me an update. We are thinking about a small reorg in his organization so we can have some more dedicated time to some of our communication channels, such as social media. And then there's another need for someone that is responsible for our digital content, and then someone that is really dedicated and savvy around our PR strategy. As we talked today, we realized that we are lacking in those things, and there are a couple of reasons that we might be lacking. We try to do a root cause analysis. So that was only a 45-minute conversation, so I can revisit with him tomorrow because I have a one-on-one meeting with him just to see if we can give the board an update. If not tomorrow, sometime very soon.
I think they might help with communication and helping to make sure that families that don't show up to school board meetings are
still being represented. Yes, ma'am.
I know that we've heard from everybody except Dr. Maddox, and we've heard from, have you? Okay. Do you have any questions or comments?
No, because I'm too emotional, to be honest. And so I just, the communication for me is most important, having some type of plan to our community, because our community, we're losing them. And when instances happen, I know that the investigations have to go on, but at some point, I'm thinking as the community person, because that's what I am, and I'm frustrated, and I want us to have a better sense of just concern for the community when things happen and there is hurt. Even if it's, I know that, legally we have to follow legal processes, but also where is the moral where are our moral processes? We just, I'm going to start right there. Okay, I'll start right there. But I'm looking forward to a detailed communication plan, a little bit surpassing what Ms. Karina's talking about, but a PR person, someone who can truly, when we're fighting against, Facebook and newspaper, and we're seen as one, we're elected to represent the people, but yet we can't get into operations. So when we want to say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not, so whatever we might want, we have to follow strict guidelines. But that communication piece is missing, and it just continues to deepen the hole of mistrust within the district. So I'll leave it right there.
And if I may jump in, Mr. Gaskins, I know in board, I think it may have been last year's evaluation, one of our action items from that was that communication plan and sort of working collaboratively to create that. And so I do understand there's some urgency there, and also want to balance that with being intentional, and then also any opportunities, of course, for collaboration. I think when we discussed it during our self-evaluation, it wasn't this most recent one, but maybe the one before then, it was sort of discussed in terms of like the district's communication plan, but with the multiple parts, right? What are the plans for the board, and then what are the plans for the district, and then how those work together. But I can go back and take a look at the video, because I think we recorded that. But I did want to highlight that as something that's been on the board's radar. All right. Any additional questions, concerns? Are all hearts and minds clear? Mr. Gaskins, is there anything that you want to add additional, or?
I will, Dr. Maddox, we have received that, and we will do something about it. And so all of the comments here, I think we are in agreement with what has been said, and there are some questions that don't have answers that need answers, right? So that is our responsibility to do that. We are very concerned about the feeling of distrust in our community, and we know that it is our responsibility to have a strategy to address that. So we will have a strategy to do that.
And let me just say really quick, I know budgeting is coming up, and so just as an individual member, and I would assume with all of the board, we've I think consistently been supportive. So if there are any things that we need to be thinking through on our end, is from a funding standpoint or a line item, particularly in support of that communication plan, but also the strategic, the outcomes, and the people and the resources and positions. Let us know.
Mr. Harris is watching. He just sent me a text message that said that we've actually sent out a survey to our community around how we improve our communication. 350 staff members have filled it out, and the parent and community survey goes out on Friday. So we will work on what are also our strategy for those that don't often fill out surveys. A lot of times, our marginalized populations will fill out a survey, but it has to come from their child's teacher through Ramon Dojo, one of those. So we'll discuss that strategy when I meet with him tomorrow. But he says there is a survey that is going to go out to that point that Dr. Maddox made, for them to give us some feedback on how we can do better.
I just wanted to echo what Dr. Maddox said also, that one of the reasons why we wanted to have this meeting was because we, as a board, it's difficult for us to know exactly what it is that we can do to try to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the students and living up to the values that we say that we have as a district. And so, it's really important to make sure that all the children in the district feel valued and included and don't feel like they are not part of the district. And as I mentioned already, and Dr. Maddox said also, we're not involved in the operation of the district, and that's not our job, but we are sort of overseeing the district, and we are held accountable for upholding the values and the mission of the district, and making sure that children don't feel discriminated against, and making sure that everybody feels like they have the same opportunities is really important. So I guess just whatever the board can do along those lines, I hope that will be brought to us, whether it's a budget item or whether it's a policy item, or whatever the things are that are within our lanes of operation.
I think just for me in my short time, and I'm ready for Dr. Thomas to come back well and take back her seat, but I think I've had one-on-one phone calls with board members. That has been very helpful to me. I think that sometimes there's context that we can't share publicly, but if it's one board member or two board members, people can be as honest as they want to be. They can be as frustrated as they want to be. But I think that adds the urgency to the work. It is very difficult to prioritize the needs of non-board members. I'm just going to be honest about that. But I think having a conversation with the individual just helps the superintendent and cabinet say, this is what she meant. She did not have time to articulate this. He did not have time to articulate this at the board. But we had an hour phone call or a 30-minute phone call. These are the notes that I have. Let's take some action from this. I think for me, and I know Dr. Thomas is different, but for me, having that phone call or having that Zoom meeting is very powerful because you know where people stand. And I think that sometimes things get lost in emails or you're really, really busy, so you read the email 4 hours after the 15 emails have come through. So I think having more one-on-one or groups of pairs or trio conversations could be something that we can have that conversation and really say to the board, okay, this is what's going to come up at the board meeting, and this is why we're adding this position. And we've eliminated another position, but we really want you to support this position, and these are the reasons why.
Could I add just one last thing before we wrap up? I would also, especially as the budget period is starting to sort of take off, I would urge the district to take a very serious look at the organizational chart, because it seems to me that, and maybe other members of the board, that there is not a streamlined communication between teachers and what's happening in their classrooms and what's happening in their buildings and administration. And if it's not immediate, then the evaluation process of administrators and staff and cabinet, then that process gets watered down. If the communication is not immediate, then what happens is these things start to spiral and get bigger and bigger, and then big problems erupt, and suddenly you start hearing about all the other issues that were happening within the buildings. So if there is a way that the organizational chart can become a lot more linear so that teachers feel that they have a voice and these issues can be addressed sooner rather than erupting into chaos, then we may be able to, not the board, but the district, then may be able to address issues before they become these big problems. And when I say these, I'm meaning just in general. So that organizational chart, I think, is going to be a really important component. And through the budget process, I assume that it's possible that you can look at streamlining some of these positions and building less of a hierarchical structure and more of a pyramid where people are communicating from the top to the bottom.
And so if I may sort of interject, because I do think the organizational chart is on our work session agenda. And so I don't want to cut that conversation off, but I do know that we will have a carved out time to discuss it more, and maybe even to hear from all board members as well as where the district stands, so that you can sort of share with us, this is where we are, this is what we're thinking, because of course it's your creation. And we can sort of share some thoughts and have some discourse around that. I did see your microphone on, and
Yeah.
The point is well taken, Dr. Anderson. I just want to be sure that we, we do know that that is on our agenda for tomorrow before we have a discussion and then have another discussion tomorrow about the
Right.
organizational
I'll be
chart.
brief. I just think that we've had discussion about the communication plan that deals with the community, which is a huge piece. The organizational chart to make sure that everyone feels supported is huge. But I also think that that last piece of it lies with us as a board. As I go through our policies, we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of aspirations, but they don't empower the board to do much of anything. And so when situations are happening, we're kind of just sitting like, okay, when we should be drafting policies and make sure we're able to, in every situation, hold the superintendent accountable so that he or she or they can hold everyone else accountable down that org chart. And so I think as we go through and we work these things out, we as a board need to be very intentional in making sure that any policies that need to be revised to offer specific directives are put in place so that it's not aspirational, but there's some meat and some substance and some accountability to it.
And don't forget our strategic priority, because that is what really guides the evaluative process, right? Because there's so many different policies that we can't capture everything, but it is important. So I'm not saying that, Ms. Hall, but what I'm saying too is that the work around the strategic direction, what those initiatives are and what the outcomes are, and then what we expect from the superintendent and what they then expect and what they hold the staff accountable for, that has to go hand in hand, or else it's policy for the sake of policy until there's a problem or a violation of something.
So if I may, I just have one last little thing after you
Yes,
finish.
sure. Go ahead.
So again, I appreciate the energy of today, and I'm grateful that we had an opportunity to have this conversation. I think I would like to have had it as an action item on the regular agenda. I would like for our called meetings to be things of an urgent nature. And I'm just not feeling that sense of urgency from where I am, and maybe it's just me not feeling that. I do feel strongly, though, that we should definitely look at, again, exploring the outcomes of what we're expecting when we have this, especially priority 3, when we're in our meeting with our superintendent and doing our strategic plan. I want us to absolutely know what we expect to see the outcome. I don't know that the conversation that I've heard here today changed anything that was creating the sense of urgency. I do know that because we have some failure somewhere, perhaps, that we have created a very hostile environment in 2 of our schools, at least, where administration and teachers aren't feeling comfortable or safe or whatever the word may be. Students are having those same issues. And so I would like for us to figure out how we can get to a more amicable way of addressing our shortcomings. I am so ready for that to happen. And if we think a communication plan is going to do that, I'm all on board. If we need something else, I'm all on board for hearing that solution too. So thank you.
All right, well, we will, seeing no other microphones on, Mr. Gaskins, is there any additional? Okay, all right. Well, we'll move forward to number 4, which is adjournment. The floor is open.
I so move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Davis, a second by Dr. Maddox. Seeing that there are no objections, we are adjourned at 7:08 p.m. Have a good evening.